In this Goulet Q&A, I talk about writing with really a variety of flex nibs, thickening your fountain pen ink to use for calligraphy, and my favorite pens that I never talk about. Hey there, Brian Goulet of GouletPens.com, and this week is January 15th of 2016. I can't believe it's 2016 already. I still am kind of adjusting, but yeah, we're getting right into it here. So been up to a few things. You know, holiday season for us is completely insane. So January is very much like a catch-up, not catch-up like, eating ketchup, but catch up as in catch our breath, because holidays are exhausting for anyone with young kids and traveling and families, and then a business that's retail and the holidays and all that. Very busy. So January, it's slowed down a little bit for us, which we're embracing, but now we're working on a lot of goal setting stuff, kind of reflecting on what happened last year. What can we learn? What can we do better? We are never one to rest on our laurels here at Goulet, so we like to always be improving. And January is a really good time for us to be thinking about that. Not so much like a New Year's resolution standpoint kind of thing, because I didn't even really think about that at all this year. It's really just like goal setting. What do we want to be doing for this year? So good time to be reflecting there. I had some just kind of family time this past weekend. Took down our Christmas decorations, which was kind of sad a little bit, but that's all right. Time marches on, so now we're back to kind of normal life here. We've got some products that are coming in here. We've got Visconti Hall of Music that we launched this week, which is essentially similar to a Van Gogh, if you're familiar with that pen at all. Very nice pen. I got a video that I put out on it early in the week, so you can check out the full deets on that one. But it's been moving along nicely. Very beautiful pen. Visconti will have lots of surprises for this year. One of which I just got a sample in yesterday, and it's pretty friggin' rad. Nobody even knows about it yet, so that'll blow your mind. But I can't talk about it yet. We got Kustoms that we have talked about. We've got it up on our site now, though we don't have all the pictures yet, so they're coming. There's kind of like, 15 different colors in 2 different pen models, so it's a little bit to photograph. So we've been working on that for really the last week and then some. So we're shooting to launch those next week, and I think it's going to be pretty cool because we're going to offer the full selection of like a pen body, a grip, nib, all that, and 600 different combinations you can have between the 2 pen models, between the nib and all the different colors and stuff you can get. So it's going to be pretty cool. So I've been working on actually 3 different Kustoms videos, and I think I'm actually going to be able to work out an interview with Dan Bishop from Kustoms as well. So he's the essentially product designer, so he pretty much designed the pens. So I think I'm going to be able to work that out in the next couple of weeks too. So that's kind of cool. Kind of a new thing. A lot of people ask for more interviews and stuff, so I think I might be able to make that happen. So I talked to him for like an hour and 45 minutes on Saturday last weekend, just learning about the brand, about Kustoms, their background, all that kind of stuff. So it's always really cool when I can speak kind of directly with somebody who kind of helped to really start the company. It gives me so much context and kind of what they're shooting to do and all that. It's really, really kind of neat. I'm obviously a businessy guy, so I'm really driven to kind of know how people tick and do things the way they do in business. So it's really interesting. So Kustoms is made from good stock. They're good people there, and we're excited to be having their pens coming out soon. Also, this week we posted about some shipping updates. We've had January is always the time when there are shipping price increases, which we usually try to absorb those if we can, but it sparked some good conversation about just kind of our shipping philosophy and kind of why we do what we do. So go and check that out on the blog if you haven't seen it yet. It's really interesting, and I'd love to know what you think. Leave comments and stuff. So that's about it for this week. I'm going to get right into the questions. I had a super long intro last week, so I'll keep it short this time. All right, first question I have, got several different pens and writing questions. But the first one I got, this is from WM Chamberlain on Twitter, said, which pens are worth paying $100 plus for the gold nib or other premium nib material upgrade, and which aren't? So this isn't a lot of pens that we're talking about here. Basically, there are some pen models, Edison is one of them. I know Bexley is a brand that we don't carry, but they're kind of along the same line as Edison, where they we'll do that. I don't know if Franklin Christoph does or not, if they have gold nibs. Forgive me for being ignorant on that. But I know Lami's got a few pens like the Studio. But these are basically pens where you have one pen model that comes with a steel nib. You can pay for an additional upgrade to get it to a gold nib. So Edison is $125 for us. Is it worth that upgrade? Especially if you're getting something like the Premier, it's a $150 pen. Is it worth paying another $125 to go from a steel nib to a gold nib? And the truth is, it depends. It really depends. It's generally, I would say, it's probably not worth it for most people. You really kind of need to understand the difference between a steel and a gold nib, which, actually Brian Gray, the reason I use that as an example, Brian Gray has a great blog post out there that I forget exactly what it's called. I should have looked it up ahead of time. He wrote it a number of years ago, In Praise of Steel Nibs. That's what it's called. So look that up. Just go In Praise of Steel Nibs on Google, or maybe I will put a link to it on the blog. But you can check that out. He really kind of talks about like what is kind of the benefit of a gold nib, and is it really that much better than a steel nib? So the truth is, like, gold nibs have a reputation for being like the premium thing because years ago gold was superior. They didn't have good steel, formulas or whatever you want to call them. They didn't have good composites, alloys, that's what I'm looking for. They didn't have good steel alloys back in the early 1900s, so gold really was the superior choice for nib materials. In recent years, gold has spiked in price, and their, modern, whatever, alchemy, chemistry, whatever you want to call it, has, made steel nibs to be pretty darn good. And then in terms of like, you can get the same tipping material on a steel and a gold nib, you can tune them and smooth them and stuff like that. So are you really getting that much better of an experience with a gold nib versus steel? That's very debatable. For most people, especially for the price and what you're paying, when gold gets to be $1,500, $1,800 an ounce for spot price, then you're talking about a pretty hefty premium over a steel nib. Now, the main thing that you're going to see is a difference. This is kind of the main benefit. Aside from the fact of just kind of status or whatever makes you feel good, is the springiness of the nib. So steel nibs generally are fairly stiff. Gold nibs are going to be a little more, I hate to use the word flexible, because it's not, when most people hear flexible, they think tines will spread and you'll see line variation. That's not. So I try to use the word flexible for that. And I use springy for what I would consider most gold nibs to be. So it's not that they're necessarily going to give you line variation, though some do, but it's really more just about the kind of the bounce or the springiness that you get while you're writing. So that ultimately is going to be the main difference. Whether or not that's worth that much of a premium for you, maybe not. Especially when you can get certain gold nib pens, whole pens, for almost that price. I'm using Edison as an example, not because I'm picking on them, but I know I've talked to Brian Gray about the pricing of his nibs and stuff like that. He doesn't make really much, if anything, on his gold nibs because they just cost him a ton. It costs a lot to make them. The raw materials are very expensive. It's a more difficult material to work with than it is with steel nibs. So he actually, as much as he charges for those steel nibs, and we don't make a great margin on them either, just from a business standpoint. We really don't. So even though they cost a whole lot more, you would think there's all this bloat and stuff that's built into them. It's really not. Everybody kind of all along the way is making slimmer margins on these expensive gold nib pens. So we really don't like push them that hard because they're really expensive. They're kind of hard for a lot of people to justify. We're taking slimmer margins, so it's more of a practicality and economic issue than anything. I would say it's really a matter of if you know that's what you want. If you know that kind of writing experience of having the bouncy kind of gold nib is what you want, and it's worth it to you to get that, then I would say yes. But you're going to know pretty much already if it is worth it for you. So I would say the long and short of it is, if you have to ask if it's worth it to you, it's not. Does that make sense? So if you know that you want that gold nib experience and you're like $125, okay, whatever. I know that I want that gold nib on this Premiere or whatever, I will get it. If you have to be like, why is it worth it? Then it's not. So that's the best gauge that I can give you right there. But the main difference, and the reason, you know, I'm talking about the gold versus steel nibs, a lot of people will say like, oh, gold is so much smoother than steel. That's really not always the case. And I can give you some examples of gold nibs that are less smooth than steel nibs. Platinum, as an example, they have just very toothy nibs. Aurora is another one. Their nibs are fairly toothy. That's kind of just the way they design them. And a lot of them are those gold nibs that will not be as smooth as even like an Edison steel nib, for example. Or even Lamy or something like that. So it really, really depends. You can generalize for the most part, but I think when most people associate gold nibs as writing smoother than steel, the analogy that I always like to use is like shock absorbers in your car, right? So if you are riding in a car with no shocks whatsoever, you're gonna feel a lot of those bumps. That's kind of like writing with a steel nib. Yes, you're gonna get a smooth ride, but when it's kind of bumpy, when you're writing, you know, and you have a, you know, texture on the paper, your hand is kind of changing in terms of its direction and, you know, pressure, things like that. You're going to feel it a little bit stiffer when you have the stiff steel nib. When you have a gold nib that's softer, it's going to kind of like bend a little bit and smooth out some of those bumps. So even though the tipping itself may be just as smooth, if not smoother on a steel nib, if you have kind of a springy gold nib, it's going to feel in your hand as if it was a smoother experience. So that right there is the difference that you're going to get. Whether or not that's worth it to you, I don't know. For most people, especially if you're just getting into fountain pens, it will not be worth it to you for that price, especially when you're talking about a $125 nib upgrade and you can, for $140, get a vanishing point or, you know, something along those lines. So I think they're going up in price here pretty soon, but, you know, still, you know, a vanishing point or a Lamy 2000 or a Pilot E95S or something like that, where just a little bit incremental more, you can get a whole pen with a gold nib. It's not going to be worth it to most people who are still kind of just acquiring pens and learning and all that. It's kind of like if you play golf, you know, and if you play golf and you know, if I'm a terrible golfer. I've golfed like twice in my life ever, and I'm really, really pretty bad. And I'm fine with that because it's just not where I choose to spend my time. However, if you were to give me whatever, who's a good golfer? I can't even name you one right now, other than Tiger Woods, and maybe he's not the best example right now, but say you gave me Tiger Woods clubs. I'm not gonna play like Tiger Woods. I can't tell the difference between Tiger Woods clubs and like a putter that you get from the putt-putt place. You know what I mean? Like I can't tell the difference because I'm not skilled and I don't have kind of that acumen to be able to really utilize a nice tool. It's kind of like that with gold nibs and like really expensive pens. It's generally not worth it for most people to reach up into a really expensive kind of range unless you've got decent experience and you really kind of fine tune and you know your experience that you're going for. It's not gonna be worth it to you because you can't appreciate the subtle differences there will be, because there is a law of diminishing returns with any of these expensive, you know, pens or upgrades or whatever. So wait and give yourself time to really get into it, and don't go, you know, spending all this money just because a couple of people say, oh, it's so much worth it. You won't really notice the difference. It's like anything. It's like expensive wine. I can't tell the difference between a $125 bottle of wine and a $1.25 bottle of wine. I really can't tell the difference. They all just taste, you know, whatever, generic to me. But a lot of people who have a refined palate can. So wait until you have a more refined palette with your hand, whatever the equivalent is. I don't know what that would be, but wait until you have a refined touch and tastes or whatever, and you'll appreciate it much more. So that's where I'm going to leave it off. All right, next question. This is from Evan Lachman on YouTube. It says, how does the Pilot VP Fine compare to the Pilot Metropolitan Fine? Is the Metro a little finer? I want something a little less fine than the Metro, but not sure I want the medium. Okay, so this is a great point, because now literally just coming off of a question asking about the difference in gold nibs between gold and steel. Is it worth the upgrade? You know, you got kind of the same situation here. Actually not that different than the question I just answered. Pilot Metropolitan, $15. Steel nib, relatively fine nibs. Even the medium is finer than most mediums, and the fine is definitely finer than most fines. So fine is going to be like an extra fine, or even finer than most extra fines from, say, European brands like Lamy, QOTW, you know, those kind of things. Visconti especially. Vanishing point. It's a gold nib, 18 karat gold nib. It's a tiny little nib, so it doesn't have a ton of spring on it, but even still, Pilot grinds their nibs to be fairly similar, you know, from pen to pen, but the biggest difference you're going to have here is kind of that golden steel. So in general, gold nibs, if they're a little bit springy, they could flow a little wetter, all else equal. Now granted, you've got two really kind of different pens going on here. The feed design is very different, the nib itself is very different, and maybe I'll zoom in here a little bit because I haven't been zooming a lot lately. This is one area where you can probably benefit quite a bit. So looking at, oh yes, that is not on autofocus, is it? Okay, well, that is not going to do anything for you then. Okay, so sorry, forget that. Let me zoom back out. But anyway, so you can see even from this distance, the design of the nib and the feed is very different between these two. So there is going to be a bit of a different feel. You don't really need, I don't need to go into great detail about the difference of the design, but just know that it's a little bit different. So in general, if you check the nib nook on gouletpens.com, you can tell that there's a difference between the Vanishing Point and the Metropolitan. And in this case, the Metropolitan is actually slightly thinner than the line for the Vanishing Point. So if you're comparing fine to fine, the Metropolitan fine is going to be a little bit finer than the Vanishing Point fine. So from your question, you want something a little less fine than the Metro, but you're not sure you want the medium. So let's see here. Going up to the medium on the Vanishing Point is going to be a pretty big jump. So you not only have that the medium, or sorry, that the fine is going to be, let's see here. The fine, sorry, I gotta read the question again. The Pilot VP fine compared to the Metropolitan, is the Metro a little finer? You want something less fine than the Metro. Not sure you want the medium. Okay, sorry. Yeah, the Metro is a little finer. Sorry, I have to like reference my notes pretty hard here because I wrote this late last night. Okay, so the extra fine and the fine Pilot nibs, yeah, they tend to be really fine. Mediums, okay, yeah, there is a big jump going from the fine to the medium. So if that's the case, then I think that you are probably going to regret if you go to a Vanishing Point medium in that case. And the broad really jumps up as well. So in general, a lot of people talk about like European versus European versus Japanese nibs, because there is a difference, honestly. The Japanese nibs, a lot of people tend to generalize and say that every Japanese pen, the nib size is like one size finer than European pen. That's not really true. It's usually the case I've found with extra fine and fine nibs, generally. So an extra fine European nib is like most Japanese fine nibs. Excuse me, and extra fine Japanese nibs are usually finer than anything that coming out of Europe. However, when you get to the mediums and the broads, I find that it tends to be a little bit more of a wash, with some exceptions. The medium Metropolitan is really kind of finer than most European mediums, but that's kind of the exception. Most of the other Japanese mediums, especially when you get to the gold nibs, I find to be pretty much on par with European mediums, and you can check that out for yourself in the nib nook. Click around, look at some of the Japanese brands like Platinum and Pilot and Sailor, and you can see kind of how are the fine nibs looking, how are the medium nibs looking. You can see there's usually a jump, especially with Pilot, between the fine and the medium. So extra fine is usually on the extreme end, fine is usually pretty fine, medium, there's usually a big gap between fine and medium in terms of their nib width. And then broad is usually as wet, if not wetter, than most Europeans, for Pilot especially. So there's a very wide range between extra fine and broad with most Japanese companies, whereas Europeans, it tends to be kind of compressed a little bit. So there's not as much of a difference between all those nib sizes. That's especially true with some of the steel nibs, like with Lamy, Twisby's that way a little bit. Even like some of the extra fine and fine, you're like, what's the difference really? Koeiko's like that. It's like, kind of what's the difference between the extra fine and fine? You can't always tell. Lamy 2000 is a perfect example. You can really hardly tell the difference between extra fine and fine. It's not that way with most of the Pilot stuff. So back to your original question here. I think the fine is really going to be what you're looking for to kind of summarize everything. Hopefully somewhere in that answer I was able to get you to the right place. But the fine, don't go up to the medium. It's going to be too big of a jump. Stick with the fine. All right, Donovan P on Facebook asked, can I put a Noodler's Flex nib on a Jinhao 159? And I'm realizing I don't have a 159 on my desk. And I should probably have one. So let me scoot on over here. Here's a 159. It's a big honker. It's kind of designed inspired, I'll call it, by the Mont Blanc 149, very similar in size. So it's got a number 6 size nib. So yes, you can pull the nib and feed out with relative ease. The Noodlers Flex nib is a number 6 size, but it doesn't fit super great into the Jinhao. Just got to be completely honest with you. I've had a lot of people that have tried and had some issues. And honestly, it seems to be that the biggest issues is the curvature of the nib is slightly different. And I should really grab, I wish I'd prepared this ahead of time. Let me grab one. At least I have all my pens right here, right? Like, just give me a second here. Let me see if I have one on this pen. Okay, I do. Yeah, I don't have a freestanding nib, do I? Sorry, everybody. Okay, so let me pull this out of here if I can get it easily. Okay, so this is a Noodler's nib, so I'm looking at the curvature. I can't really show you close up, but looking at it, it looks a little bit different. The Jinhao nib that comes with the pen has, you know, a curve kind of like this. The Noodler's one is a little bit flatter. So even though they're both number 6 size, like the overall size is the same, the curvature is slightly different on the 2 nibs. So basically what that means is that when you go to take your Noodler's nib and put it into a Jinhao, it's not going to want to fit very nicely. And you're kind of going to be bending the wings down on the pen as you put it in. So it has to be forced. Okay, I got it on there. It will go. It doesn't go as deep into the pen as it would on a Noodler's pen. So I can actually see the slit. Normally the slit is down inside the grip of the pen. I can see it now here. So, okay, it fits. It's in there, but I know from a lot of other people's experience of having done it that the results can be mixed as to how well it actually writes. Because the curvature is not quite the same, when you put it in, it does need to go into a specific placement inside the pen. There's like a cutout where the nib goes that fits in here. It can be essentially kind of jammed in there like I just did, but I've not heard great consistency in terms of how it writes. Some people, they say it writes okay and they can do it. Other people, they say it's just problems left and right and they are not able to do it. Now I will say, if you are able to get it in there okay, like I did here, and I go to use it, it'll probably write okay for a little bit, but it's not going to be as consistent as it would be in a Noodler's pen, mainly because the feed on this pen is not designed to keep up with the flow that's required for this pen, for this nib, sorry. So it fits in there, it can work. You may be able to flex it in kind of short bursts, especially if you've got a good amount of ink in the pen and it's flowing nicely, but really you're gonna have a hard time keeping up with it. So ultimately where I land is the Jinhao 159 is a $12.50 pen. You can get a Noodler's Flex nib for a couple of dollars. For well under $20, you can get it an experiment, and it's worth, to me, it's worth messing around and trying if you think it is. So it's up to you whether you want to actually try it or not. I'm not going to tell you it's a surefire bet that it's going to work great, but it could work okay. So it's up to you if you want to give it an experiment, but that's where I'll leave it. Collin T on Facebook says, I've noticed Brian goes over the standard pens, Ahab, Pilot Falcon, Ogiva, etc. when asked about flex nibs, but why no videos or information about the custom 912 with the FA flex nib or the Falcon flex nib, since that's a full flex nib rather than a soft nib with a bit of give. Okay, so I feel like I need to nuance your question here just a little bit because it's really not a full flex nib. It's not. Even the Pilot Falcon is not a full flex nib. They call it a soft nib. It's not a flex nib per se. And that tends to mess with people's heads just a little bit because so many people talk about the Falcon as being a flex pen, but that's honestly not what it is. It's a very soft nib with a lot of line variation, but Pilot does not advertise it as a flex nib. That's not really how it's designed in terms of the you know, kind of Western, like the European style of flex writing. You know, especially these pens coming out of Japan, which the FA nib is a prime example, and I don't talk about it a lot, partly because I have kind of a secret in that I can't write very well with that pen. Both Drew and I here, we write with a lot of different pens, a lot of flex pens and things like that, but this FA nib is like our white whale. And I haven't shot a video on it because I can't get a freaking decent shot, because I just can't figure this pen out. I know theoretically how it works better, but I haven't been able to really emulate it that great. Now, granted, I tested it out when it kind of first came out, and then I kind of got discouraged, and I haven't really messed with it a lot since. But I know from other people around our office that have used it, that, and from talking to Pilot about kind of the way it's designed, the way that this, specifically this Pilot 912 FA nib, is designed for being held in a more upright position, as a lot of the Pilot nibs can tend to do better in an upright position. And it does well when you flex it with short strokes, as opposed to long, big looping letters. And the reason it's designed that way is because of the style of writing from Japanese characters versus the kind of European longhand. You know, it's a Japanese pen. Pilot designs all their own nibs in-house. They make them all. They don't get them from some other supplier. So when they're writing with these pens, they're using them the way that they write their language, which makes a lot of sense, which can be used successfully. But when you get somebody like me, I have a heavy hand, I hold my writing angle very low, usually a little bit below 45, which 45 is kind of the ideal, the way most pens are designed. Pilot's probably upper to closer to a 40 or a 35 even. No, 30, no, that would be lower. Never mind, sorry, it's been a while since I've mathed. Been in a math class of school of some kind. Higher up, so Pilot's probably more like a 55 or a 60, honestly, in terms of where some of their pens write comfortably. It's that way with their stubs, which I talked about last week. Got a really good response kind of on how deep I went on that question. And then it's kind of the same way with these flex nibs. The Falcon tends to do a little bit better that way, and the FA especially really tends to do better that way. Higher angle, shorter strokes, not this big, long, looping, heavy-handed thing that I tend to do and Drew tends to do. So Drew and I are both kind of like, grumble, grumble. You know, we can't really figure that pen out. But then, literally, same pen, I hand it to Madigan, our community coordinator, or my wife, Rachel. They have no problem writing with the FA. None whatsoever. Just the way they naturally write is more in that style, and they love it. Drew and I just like curse the dang thing. You know what I mean? So I don't talk about it a lot, honestly, because I have issues with it. But I know the issue is a lot of me. Like, I just can't get the hang of it, and that's okay. It's these pens, you know, they're all different, and that's part of what I love / hate about fountain pens, is that you can really kind of personalize your experience by getting different pens, ink, and paper. But at the same time, when you have certain combinations of things that are going to be really wonderful for you because they're different, you're also going to have certain combinations of things that just aren't going to work for you sometimes. And that Pilot FA nib is one of those for me. So it could work out great, but at the same time, it's kind of an expensive pen just to experiment and see. Here it is, by the way. This is the stub nib that I have for it. But it's just kind of an elusive little beast for me. So it's an over $200 pen. It's just not something that I could say like, well, you know what, just go ahead and get it and try it out, like it would be for the Metropolitan or something like that. It's like, dang, you know, this is one area where it's like, I can't really hard sell it to everybody, because if I can't really get the hang of it, it maybe not be the pen that everybody else has an easy time with too. Now, granted, we'll always work with you on you know, troubleshooting and returns and stuff like that. But for me, it's just not such a slam dunk. And honestly, when it boils down to it, I haven't invested the time into that specific nib to kind of get the hang of it. I know I could. It's not that I'm incapable of learning how to use that pen. It's just I haven't made the effort. That's literally all it is. So, c'est la vie. Ethan B on Facebook says, I'm still relatively new to fountain pens, but I have a cleaning question. The water at my house is well water and has a higher mineral content than most city waters. Is it still okay to clean and flush my pens out with my rust-filled water, or should I buy water to specifically clean them? Okay, so I'm going to give you the Proper answer, and then I'll give you my real answer. So the proper answer as an official fountain pen retailer and representative of many brands is to say you should always clean your pens with distilled water at room temperature. So that's the official answer. Now, the logic behind it is that distilled water has all of its minerals removed. So essentially that just eliminates any chance of there being some kind of buildup over time in your pens, any type of reaction with anything that could possibly be in the ink that you're cleaning out. Not that a reaction really is anything that I ever hear about, but just to remove all doubt and just to, as kind of a CYA situation, anyone who makes pens or ink or whatever, they're always going to say clean your pens with distilled water, because some people just have crazy things in their water, and it's easiest for everybody to say use distilled water. Now, the real answer is it's up to you. It's your pens. You do whatever you feel is best. However, if you want to maintain kind of warranty and all that kind of stuff, if you've got crazy junk in your water and it's obviously damaged your pens, the manufacturer is going to say, well, you didn't use distilled water, so we may or may not cover this certain aspect of something. You know? So I would say if you know that you have stuff in your water and it's a pretty heavy degree, you know you're getting rings around your toilets, you're getting, like, if you have a refrigerator with an ice machine or, you know, water thing in the door and it's got all the chalky kind of stuff around it, that's all mineralization. You know, it's not going to like destroy your pen if you do it a few times, but over time, it's probably not the best. If you have a lot of different pens, and, you know, they're Metropolitans and stuff like that, just do whatever is practical for the most part. It's really up to you. You know, you are assuming all liability for how you clean your pens. You know, even if I say you should do a certain way, it's really up to you. Now, my official stance is it's best to use distilled water, especially if you know you've got junk in your water. So in reality, I have a well, I use, you know, regular water. You know, I've got a filtration system and everything. You know, I had to replace that last year. That was fun. For those of you who are on city water, you don't have to deal with having your own filtration system that you have to manage in your house. But for us in the country, we got to use filtration systems because we pull our water straight out of the earth. Anyway, so it's really a judgment call. Use distilled water if you have any doubts, or if you have any, you know, expensive pens that you just don't want to risk it. You get a gallon of distilled water for like 90 cents or something like that at the grocery store, and it lasts you forever. So it's not a huge deal. I understand it is a hassle. So I would say go ahead and pick up a gallon of distilled water. Use that to clean your more valuable pens. And then if you need to, in a pinch, clean water at somebody else's house or whatever, you can't be like, oh, I don't know, distilled water. You know, it's okay every now and then to do it. It's not like doing it once is going to destroy your pen. It's not like you're cleaning with acid or something. So that's where I'll leave it. I'm saying that a lot in this Q&A, I'm realizing. Sorry about that. I got one ink question for you. This is from Mark C. on Facebook. And it's a little bit of a question, so bear with me. I enjoy testing ink samples with my glass pen. I understand, even though I have never used them, calligraphy inks are best used with dip pens because they are acrylic-based, ergo not as runny as fountain pen ink. With a large variety of fountain pen inks over calligraphy inks, my question is there a way to possibly thicken fountain pen ink? The wetter fountain pen inks lay down such a heavy line at first, it would be nice to have a more even line. Thank you. You're welcome, Mark. Don't thank me yet. I haven't answered your question. I may not give you an answer that you like. Okay, so basically, I don't know. And I know I kind of put that in the teaser in the beginning of the video, but I honestly don't know of a good, proper way to thicken your ink for changing it to use as a calligraphy ink. I am not a deep knowledge subject person. That's not a thing, but I just said it. I'm not a whatever person about calligraphy. I know enough to be dangerous, but I don't know things like this, like creating your own hacks for making ink for calligraphy purposes. I know that Noodler's X Feather is a popular ink because it's a little on the thicker side. So it's a fountain pen ink that's a little more popular for using for calligraphy. I've heard about that a lot. Other than that, I don't really know of a good way to do it. So that's kind of the not really answering your question answer side of it. But I will say that when you're dealing with calligraphy ink, yes, you're right. It is formulated very different. You definitely don't want to use calligraphy ink in your fountain pens. But I will say that from what I understand, most calligraphy ink is a lot cheaper than fountain pen ink. So maybe what you need to do is find a new source in terms of colors. I don't think that there is as much a variety of colors for calligraphy as there is for fountain pens. I would say that that is definitely not the case. But there's good calligraphy ink dealers out there that'll have, a pretty decent variety of colors. And what I don't know at all, actually, as I'm thinking of this question right now, is whether you can mix calligraphy inks. I don't know that, in case you're thinking of that. I would love to know if you know anything about calligraphy. Can you do that kind of stuff? Please let me know in the comments, because I'm just kind of curious about that now. If you can mix calligraphy inks. Not with fountain pen inks, just with each other. Curious about that. Anyway, I haven't messed around a lot with calligraphy myself. It's kind of like vintage pens, calligraphy, some of this stuff. I'm like, that's a really deep subject, and I don't know if my ego is ready to go into an area like that and be a complete moron again, like I was with fountain pens when I first started. I'm kind of like, I'd rather just not even know what I don't know than get in there and realize I know nothing. So we'll see. I mean, I know a little bit. It's really not that big a deal, but I don't have the time and interest to invest in getting deeper in calligraphy and stuff like that right now. Who knows what the future will hold, but that's kind of where I'm at. So hopefully that can help you out a little bit, but essentially my answer is, I don't really know if that's possible. If you have experimented with it at all, though, out there in viewer land, please let me know, because I think it's a terribly interesting question, which is why I put it on here, even though I don't have a terribly interesting answer. Got a couple of personal questions this week. First one is from Smadirik on Twitter. I botched your name, and I know, and I'm sorry. What was one mistake you made getting into fountain pens that you want all newbies to be aware of? Oh boy, there are so many. I thought this was a really interesting question, which is why I wanted to take it. But the truth is, I don't have like any huge mistakes that I made. It's just a lot of little ones, just not knowing how to clean pens, not knowing what I like, and buying a lot of pens that I didn't know anything about and using them wrong and here and there. But it wasn't like one huge major, error that I made. It was just a, series of little things. That's honestly the learning experience of getting into fountain pens. And I want to encourage everybody, especially if you're newer watching this, which this is episode 108. If this happens to be one of your first videos of me that you're watching, props to you, because typically most people won't sit down and watch an hour-long video of just a dude talking in front of a camera about some crazy pen stuff. But if you have done that, my hat goes off to you, and I hope that you enjoy this. However, there was a time when I, the great Brian Goulet, I say that sarcastically, did not know anything, literally anything about fountain pens, because I didn't grow up with them. I didn't, use them in school and stuff like that. I didn't discover fountain pens at all until I was 25. And that was when I decided I would start a business catering to fountain pens, of course. But I knew nothing, and it's still very fresh in my mind and shapes very much of the way that I talk about pens, because it was not that long ago in the grand scheme of things, and it was such a formative experience for me to be so completely ignorant about the whole fountain pen experience that I very much want to maintain that really for the rest of my life, because my whole kind of mission is to make sure that fountain pens don't just kind of age and then die off with the people that kind of always used them. If there's going to be a continuation and further development and get more excitement in teaching people, it has to be new people discovering fountain pens and how wonderful they are and being taught how to use them. So that's really what I'm all about, even today. Even when I am getting into some more expensive pens, Homo sapiens and the like, I love what they are, but I'm not going to say that that's the ultimate experience. It's really just kind of about the journey and learning what you like. There's plenty of people out there who say, you know what, I've tried a lot of pens, and the Platinum Preppy is really my favorite, and it's the ultimate for me, and I'm going to buy 20 of them and fill them with different colors of ink and just use a different Platinum Preppy every 10 minutes. bully to you. You know, I think that's fantastic. I really do. I want you to have the best experience for you that's possible. The whole purpose behind the Goulet Pen Company is to prove that business can be personal. That's very much shaped by the whole fountain pen experience and how personal that it really is. And also, it's really about you and your discovery through this whole journey of using a fountain pen. You can learn a little bit about yourself, you use them, your taste can change over time and all that. So I think for me, to actually answer the question now, for me, probably the mistake I'll say that I made, and I'll put a little asterisk here because I'm going to come back to this thought in a second. The mistake that I made in the beginning was I used a few different pens, and I bought like 12 different cheapo type of pens and quickly discovered like, I don't really like most of these, but I found one that I kind of liked. And ironically, it's a pen that I don't even sell anymore. It's the Falcon script. It's not a perfect pen. It's really not. It's got its issues. The converter doesn't fit great in it. You can't post it. It's just a weird shape. But the 1mm pen, it was my first italic nib, and it really helped me discover like, wow, this italic stuff really makes my handwriting look halfway decent. So I bought a bunch of them in the beginning, and I used them rather exclusively for quite a while. And as I got more into fountain pens too, I would use some finer nib pens and stuff like that, but I was really stuck on italics and broad nibs for a while, because in the early days of Goulet Pen Company, we were all ink and paper. So for me, you know, using fine paper like Rhodia, which I love, using a variety of fountain pen inks, the broad and italic nibs show off the ink colors better than extra fines and fines. So for me, I had kind of a limited experience in my full fountain pen knowledge for the first couple of years that I used fountain pens. Now, is that really a bad thing? No, because I was using something that I really liked and really enjoyed. I was able to learn a lot about the ink by using pens consistently and stuff like that. So it wasn't necessarily that much of a problem. Hence where the asterisk is coming in that I put in earlier. Footnote. So in the grand scheme of where I was at the time with my business, learning different inks, using a consistent pen that showed off a lot of the properties of the ink wasn't a mistake. However, I personally missed out on some of the experience that you can have with some of the finer nibs and things like that than I could have. I now have a lot more fines, extra fines, and so on than I used to. And I don't use stubs as exclusively as I used to. In fact, I don't use stubs really all that often in my daily writing, except when I'm corresponding, because I think it just looks awesome. So I use such a wide range of nibs now. It's really given me so much deeper an appreciation for all the different styles of writing. Now, part of that's probably shaped by the fact I have a much larger pen collection, so I will get a pen just because it has a certain type of nib and I don't really care about the body, just because I want to kind of round out that experience. I would not consider myself to be a collector in the fact that I like to have a methodical kind of approach towards the pens that I acquire. I am more just a general acquirer, or hoarder for the less proper term. I just like to have such a varied experience. So I'll buy a pen, you know, the same pen in different colors just because it's a color that I don't have yet. So you look inside my pen cabinet and you're just like, what the heck is your approach towards your pen collection? And it's like, well, I just want to have as much knowledge as I can about as many different things as possible, because that's my style, but it might be different for somebody else. So given that that's really my approach, I kind of limited myself in the early years of my pen experience by sticking too much to a narrow kind of scope of pen usage and not expanding. I've rounded that out in recent years, but I probably missed out when I was a newbie because I didn't seek to have enough of a different experience. So that's where I'd say, you know, the approach that I took was good in that I bought a lot of inexpensive pens and kind of a wide range of nibs, but I didn't really spend time using them in different scenarios to really appreciate why fine nibs are so good. I was using only like premium paper, so italic nibs were, of course, no problem. Finer nibs are way better when you don't have any control over the paper that you're using. So when you're out there like in the real world using other people's paper, fine nibs are often way better than these wet gushing pens. So it's really kind of varies in that way. So I don't know, thought that was an interesting question, and wanted to clue you in a little bit on the history of the Brian Goulet fountain penning experience. All right, Jim C on Facebook said, 2 weeks ago you got a question about your top 10 favorite pens, but what are some pens you love but never talk about? And that was my hook line right at the end of the intro there. Honestly, I don't have a lot of them, so I'm not gonna really be able to like blow your mind here, but I do have some that I don't talk about a lot, but I do really like more than is represented by how much I talk about them, if that makes sense. One of them is the Platinum 3776. Now, the reason I don't talk about it a lot is because I don't know. Honestly, this one is elusive to me. I always think about this pen, I'm like, you know what? This is a great pen. It writes really well. It has a great reputation. They're gorgeous. The build, the fit and finish on these pens is impeccable. I mean, Japanese made, phenomenal quality. It even has this Chartres blue, which I love, the color of this pen. It's got the slip and seal cap, so the thing like never dries out. But I just don't talk about it that much, I think because, especially recently, so much buzz and attention has gotten around soft nibs and flexible nibs and things like that, which is a little bit of a different path than the way that Platinum is with their nibs. They're gold nibs, 14 karat gold nibs, but they're relatively stiff and fairly toothy. So it is kind of a niche, a sub niche, if you will, with fountain pens for people that like that style of pen. Now, if you are, you know, fairly moderate in terms of your pen nib smoothing ability, you can smooth these things out and get them to write really nicely. The nibs are still going to be fairly stiff. They do offer a soft nib in a couple of different sizes and a couple of different pens, which those feel more like your kind of traditional gold nibs, a little bit springy. Not line variation springy, but will feel springy, kind of more like a regular gold nib. But generally, their nibs are fairly stiff. It's just kind of how they do them. But it's just one that it's like, you know what, I really should do more on the Platinum 3776, and then it just never comes up in the conversation. But a lot of people that I know that are really into these Platinum pens, they just love them and they're like hard fast into them, and they get a variety of them and they just kind of stick with it. So it's one that tends to just not get a lot of buzz, I think because the design is so classic. You know, they don't come out with new stuff. I mean, they do come out with new stuff every now and then, but it's not earth-changing stuff. You know, they don't have tons of new models and all that. They tend to keep kind of with the same model, and they'll change a color, they'll change a thing here and there, but they're not revolutionizing stuff. They're fairly traditional in their approach. And that just doesn't tend to grab attention as much as maybe some of the other stuff does. You know, like Visconti comes out with all this crazy stuff. So it's a more traditional approach that they take. But it is a really solid pen. Another one that doesn't get as much love as I feel that it probably could is the TWSBI Classic. Now, I think part of it is because the design of the TWSBI Classic breaks tradition a little bit with most of the other TWSBI pens in that it's not clear. It's not that diamond kind of look that most of their other pens have. All of the other pens have, actually, now that I think about it. So it's a little bit different in that way, but it's a solid pen. It's a nice writer, you know, still piston mechanism. The ink capacity is actually fairly decent on this pen. It's a thinner pen too. So those of you with smaller hands may actually really like the way this pen writes. And when they first came out with it, this is a first gen model of it here, it did not post. Now they have rubber O-rings built into the filler knob here, and it does post. So it kind of fixed the one issue that I really thought was a problem with this pen. And there's no cracking issues with this pen. The plastic that's used is a different type of plastic that's used on their other pens. They've like almost never had warranty issues with the Classic significantly. So it's a solid pen. I'll promote it here a little bit and say that it's one that's worth checking out. It's in the same price range as all the other ones. It just doesn't get as much attention. And it does have an ink window. It's not like you can't see your ink level in your pen. It just, you don't see the ink sloshing around like you do. It disassembles just like all the other pens. It just doesn't get as much attention. So there's that one. And then the kind of last one, well, I've got the Edison pens too. I'll do the Edison pens. Edison pens does get a lot of attention. We do talk about it here and there, but honestly, I've never done like a full in-depth review on the Premier, and I've never really done a full in-depth review on any of the Edison pens. I think part of it is Edison's got a good following anyway. We do get a good buzz about it. People that like Edison generally know they like Edison, but I just, as I look back at my video catalog, I'm like, dang, I really haven't done that much with Edison previously. I mean, we do a collaboration with it. We do a lot of the premiere, like the seasonal premiere as new colors come out, we do talk about those. So that, you know, it's kind of borderline there, but I really haven't gone deep in depth about Edison. So that one is an opportunity for me to improve. And then kind of the last one I have on my group is a Pilot Custom 823. I do get asked about it, so I'll talk about it from kind of a comparison or maybe a troubleshooting standpoint. But it's a pen that can kind of slip under the radar for some. It is a vacuum filling pen, so it's a little different filling mechanism, but it has a huge ink capacity. The design is just kind of different. It's this like kind of amber color, this kind of brown with gold trim, and it does have clear body, so you can see your ink sloshing around, which is cool. And it writes really nicely. It's very similar writing experience to the Pilot Custom 74, Custom 912, but it's got a larger nib, so it's like more like a number 6 size nib. Not number 6 exactly per se necessarily, because Pilot designs their nibs a little bit different, and they say in there like, don't take your nib out. You can, but it'll void the warranty. But it's got a cap insert, so it doesn't really dry out like at all. I had when the Jerbon Stormy Gray first came out, this would have been a while ago, right? Summer of 2014. I went to the DC Pen Show, met up with somebody from Execlair that had a bottle of it. This is before it was released. And they said, hey, can you take a look at it? We'll get to show you the ink in person. I saw it and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. This is awesome. And so I filled this pen with that ink because I was like, this pen's got a big ink capacity. I'll be able to suck up a lot of it and then I can kind of take it with me and use it for a while. Because it was like months after that before the ink actually came out. But anyway, I left that ink in this pen because I didn't use all of it. I left that ink in this pen, I'm not joking, for 8 months, I think, after that. Never dried out. Never had an issue cleaning it out, nothing. So the pen's really easy to maintain. It's a very reliable writer. Nib is fantastic. It is a little on the expensive side. It's pushing $300. So I think for that reason, it doesn't necessarily get a ton of buzz, but it's a solid pen and I love it. But I just don't talk about it as much. All right, hopefully that was interesting for you. Got a business question, then a troubleshooting, and then we'll take it home. This one is from Sophia Lee 819 on Twitter. Is there a gift wrap option when purchasing from Goulet pens? No, there is not. And we did it a couple of years ago. Oh, forgive me, I'm stretching. I did it a couple of years ago. And it was actually really tough for us to do. We can do it for like a pen here and there, but it gets really challenging for us when somebody orders a pen, a notebook, and a bottle of ink. And we've got to try to wrap it so that we can ship it in the boxes that we use. And we have to try to gift wrap it so that it looks nice. That gets pretty impossible for us. So it's really challenging. It takes a lot of extra time, actually. So we really wouldn't be able to do it without a surcharge, an upcharge. Would you be willing to pay $5 or $10 more? It'd probably have to be more like $10 more for a gift wrap option. Some people, yeah, maybe especially around the holidays. But the thing is, we ship everything US mail. We ship them in the smallest packages possible to try and keep your shipping costs down. If we went to something like UPS, FedEx with some of the larger boxes and had, basically when you gift wrap stuff, you got to put it in a box, gift wrap it, and then you got to put that in a bigger box to keep the presentation nice. So we're shipping larger boxes, a lot more expense increase with that. It's just not something that we've had some people ask here and there, but it's not something that's been like such a deal breaker that we have to offer it. And we would have to charge a pretty decent upcharge in order to really have it make sense for us. And I just haven't really felt that is the right move to go. So, it's something that I'll think about. I'd love to know kind of what you all think and if that's something that you really, really like or that other companies offer that, helps you make a decision to buy there instead of from us. you know, of course, then if it's like, if I'm keeping you from really being able to get what you want, you know, I'll really take that into consideration. But just from a efficiency standpoint of where we are, it's really a complicated thing for us to start to offer, especially with the variety of products that we offer and all that. So it's not such an easy thing for me to consider. Yep. Last question. This is a troubleshooting question from Connor Adlam on YouTube. Hi Brian, how would you suggest maintaining my Visconti Homo sapiens? Do I need to send it to somewhere, or can I do it myself? I clean it regularly, but I'm concerned about the lubrication. Are Noodlers eel inks a substitute for lubrication? Well, yeah, sort of. That's what Noodlers eel inks are designed for, is to be used in pens that don't easily disassemble, so that you can, you know, kind of use and maintain your pens without having to do a lot of special stuff. So that is certainly an option. Now I will say I've got the larger size Homo sapiens here. Rachel, my wife, owns the midi size. The difference between those two is this is a vacuum filling pen. The midi size is a piston filling pen. If you happen to get to a point where really when it comes down to maintenance, you need to clean it regularly, that will right off the bat be the best thing for you. Even if you're using the same ink in it, which, you know, would probably, you know, be inclined to happen, especially the vacuum filling ones, because they kind of take longer to clean out. So I tend to keep one ink in my vacuum pens much more than my cartridge converters or my pistons even. But if you're using a piston filling pen, you're going to need to kind of maintain that a little more from like a greasing the piston kind of standpoint than you would with a vacuum. Because the vacuum, the ink capacity is larger, so right off the bat, you're not going to need to fill it quite as often. And when you're filling a vacuum pen, you basically do like kind of 2, maybe 3 pumps to get it full. Whereas piston, you're screwing and screwing and screwing and unscrewing, and you're moving that thing kind of up and down a lot. Especially when it comes time to clean it out. You're having to move that thing back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. But with the vacuum one, it's just not as much kind of friction that it's dealing with. So the maintenance that's required for that is really not as intense as most pistons. When it gets to the point where it's not functioning properly anymore, then I don't really know of a great way to maintain it yourself. I haven't had mine long enough to really get to that point yet. And really, Visconti's kind of more of along the lines of maybe not taking your pen apart yourself, you know, we'll take care of it for you kind of thing. When I say we, I mean them. I don't have like special tools and equipment and stuff to be able to fully disassemble the pens, though it's certainly something I could consider if that ends up being something a lot of people need. I haven't had a lot of people saying that that's really an issue, so which is why I haven't really been pushing them for that yet. But certainly it could be if that would make sense for us in the future. I'm not afraid of getting our hands a little dirty when it comes to, you know, tweaking stuff. But Coles of London is the company that distributes Visconti in the US, and they have repair people that will maintain stuff like that if it gets to the point where it's really affecting your pen's ability to function. Again, I don't really know what would cause that. If you're using it regularly and cleaning it out, it's going to last a long time. But if it does get to the point where something happens and you need to replace something, they're pretty workable. They're pretty reasonable people that will deal with it. They're not going to try to ding you left and right, you know, just because they can. So I would say, you know, clean and maintain your pens regularly as much as you can, just like you should with all your pens. And then if it gets to the point where the pen is not very functional and usable anymore, then, you know, reach out to us or reach out to Coles of London, and we'll find out kind of what's going on and figure out where to go from there. All right. Well, folks, that's it. This is another Q&A in the books, in the history books. I do have a question of the week for you this week, and it's kind of building off of a question that I did this week. I've kind of liked doing that recently, trying to keep the question of the week fairly relevant to the topics at hand. So my question for you is, what pens do you have in your personal collection that you love, but you just don't use as much as you feel you really should for how much you love it? You know, maybe even in my context, it's pens that I talk about because I do videos. But for you, if you have a, you know, fairly decent collection, fair number of pens, and you're like, yeah, you know what, I really like that pen, but when it comes down to picking a pen to ink up, you kind of always skip over it for whatever reason. So dig into that a little bit. I'd like to hear about that. Maybe think about it and say, you know what, I used to love that pen. I haven't used it in 2 years. Go ahead and ink it up. tell me about that. Tell me about that experience, maybe why it's fallen out of your favor or why you just haven't really been using it as much. I would be really interested to hear about that. All right, so that's your homework for this week. So post in the comments on YouTube or on the blog or whatever and let me know. Cool? All right, folks, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate spending this time with you. As always, I'm just really honored that you are willing to sit here and listen to me for now an hour. So thank you. It's really cool stuff. So I appreciate it. I hope you have a fantastic week. If you like these things that I talked about, you can check them all out on gouletpens.com. If you want to see kind of a full bulleted, itemized list of everything that I talked about, you can check it out on the blog. If you're just watching this on YouTube, you can see on the blog, we've got links and all kinds of things like that to specific products that I've mentioned here. So that's it. If you like this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, wherever the subscribe button is these days. Please do that because that helps me to know basically how many people are watching, how many people are really interested in what I'm doing. And it just, kind of internally motivates me to like, yeah, you know what, I'm gonna keep pounding these things out. Been doing it for 2.5 years almost now, the Q&A thing, which is kind of just crazy. But, it just helps me to keep it up. Always a good thing. Been doing the pen thing for over 6 years now. And actually, now that I think about it, I am coming up on my 6-year anniversary of shooting videos here in a couple of days. I think it was the 17th. It was either the 15th or the 17th of January. I should probably look that up. Seems like a trivia question I should know, but hey, woohoo, let's celebrate. By the time I shoot the next Q&A, it'll have been over 6 years. So pretty wild, over 6 years, over 900 videos we have on YouTube now. 900. Crazy. And well over 300 of those were last year. Thanks to Q&A, all the slices that we've been doing for that. So kind of cool stuff. Anyway, have a great weekend, great rest of your week. I'll catch you on the flip side. Right on.